Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Saturday, it's January 25th, and today is day 477 since October 7th of 2023. The ceasefire between Hamas and Israel has held for another hostage and prisoners exchange that happened today. This was the second of several that are planned over the next, or total of 42-day ceasefire agreement as a part of phase one. I wanted to start by talking about the Palestinian prisoners that have been released, in large part because it's very, very difficult to find out any information about them in Western media. Who are they? Hundreds of Palestinians are expected to be released over the course of the next several weeks. And the ceasefire, the first among those were political activists and freelance journalists. Because it's so difficult to find out the news, I wanted to highlight some of these individuals. And then, of course, I'll talk about the hostages that were released and other news from the Middle East. So Israeli authorities released an additional 200 Palestinians who were imprisoned today. This was the second group to be released. So far, the total number of prisoners is 290 and 7 Israeli hostages in total. The initial group of Palestinian prisoners included 90 people, children, teens, and women. Israel described them as agitators or terrorists, claiming that they pose a threat to national security. I spoke previously about the Palestinian journalist Khalida Jarrar, 61 years old. She was held under administrative detention without charges or trial. She was arrested for, quote, speaking out against the occupation, end quote. At least that's what she says that she was arrested for. Rula Hassanin, age 30, the mother of an infant daughter, a freelance reporter who's written for Al Jazeera and local Palestinian outlets. She served for 11 months on charges of incitement and support for terrorism. International advocates say Hassanin was expressing her viewpoints about Gaza against the Israeli attacks there and the situation in general, that her arrest was a violation of humanitarian international law. Shahata Jaraba, 24 years old, was released after being arrested on charges of incitement on social media. Her husband, Noaf, said that before October 7th, settlers in the West Bank were attacking residents and their land. There were checkpoints and movements were hard. But if there was no occupation, there would be no problems, no war, and no terrorism. That's a direct quote. Among the 200 Palestinians released from Israeli jails today, 121 of them were serving life sentences. 79 were serving long sentences. The oldest was 69 years old. The youngest was 15 years old. 70 Palestinians of that group are going to be deported. Egypt will host them for 48 hours, and then they will be sent to Tunisia, Algeria, and Turkey, all of which agreed to receive them. A Palestinian set for release under the agreement refused to return to Gaza. He feared for his life, he said. And another prisoner exchange is scheduled for next week. Some of what Israel considers to be the more high-profile prisoners released today include Tabet Mardawi, a senior figure in Islamic Jihad. He was arrested for Operation Defensive Shield in the West Bank in 2002. That was during the Second Intifada. He was involved in the killing of 20 Israelis and the injury of approximately 150 others. Ashraf Zagair, a senior Hamas figure in prison, was dispatched. He dispatched a suicide bomber responsible for a 2002 attack in Tel Aviv, where 6 people were killed and 70 people were wounded. Well, Al-Qassem, the leader of a Hamas cell in Silwan, East Jerusalem, was sentenced to 35 life terms for involvement in a series of attacks that included an attack in 2002 on the Cafe Moment in Jerusalem. It killed 11 people. Another attack at the Sheffield Club that killed 15, and an attack at Hebrew University that killed 9. And finally, Nassim Zaatari, a member of the Hamas military wing, was convicted of carrying out a 2003 attack on a bus line in Jerusalem in which 23 people were killed. He was sentenced to 23 life terms. He was also to be released today. In past updates, I summarized some of the other prisoners. I'll try to give updates as I find out about them. The Hamas setting free of the female soldiers happened today. The 4 Israeli hostages were soldiers, women who were freed by Hamas today in exchange for the 200 Palestinian prisoners. The release in Gaza City occurred hours earlier than expected. And accept that under the deal, Israel was expected to partially withdraw their troops to facilitate the movement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to their homes in the north of Gaza. But today, Hamas, according to Israel, Hamas violated the deal. It was supposed to include all the living civilian women first. And one of the women who's suspected to be alive as a hostage, her name is Arbel Yehud. She's a 29-year-old civilian who was abducted with her boyfriend at the kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. She was supposed to be among those released today. Initially, there was a consideration like, might she no longer be alive? But Hamas informed mediators that the Israeli captive Arbel Yehuda is alive. She will be released next Saturday. Initially, Netanyahu's office said that they would not begin to withdraw from the Strip until Yehud's release was arranged. One of the challenges in the negotiations is that not all of the hostages are held by Hamas, and Arbel Yehud is held by Islamic Jihad, who said that they would engage in the hostage exchange. Other hostages are held by private families in Gaza. Israelis have expressed a sort of national euphoria accompanied by the dread over the fate of the dozens of other hostages who've not yet been released, most of whom are not slated, or many of whom are not slated to be released until the next phase, which would conclude in early March. Another Israeli family who are waiting to learn the outcome of whether or not they're alive is the Babas family. The mother, Shiri, and her two children. Kafir was abducted at 9 months old. His brother, Ariel, was taken at 4. They were initially thought to be dead, but their current status remains unknown. On February 19th of last year, the IDF presented the relatives of the Babas family a video showing Shiri and the children while they were still alive several days after their abduction. The video was filmed in South Gaza, but the Babas family, they were slated to be released in the initial phase of the hostage deal. And so their family was devastated that they were not released today. Hamas has claimed that Shiri and her 2 boys are no longer alive. Their deaths were announced more than a year ago, but Israeli officials have not confirmed that. So their fate is not known. We're still in phase 1, of which 33 of the remaining 98 hostages are supposed to be released. There is this question about whether or not Israel will withdraw from the Netzarim corridor and the transition to the private American security forces that are supposed to run the security there, which would allow Palestinians to be able to return home to the north. Reports indicate that there are masses of Palestinians lining up in the Wadi Gaza area, hoping to cross to the north tomorrow. Israel says it won't allow that to happen until Arbel Yehud that issue is resolved. I believe just before I put these notes together to record, that it was determined that that's been worked out, that she'll be released next week. There was an incident at the Netzarim corridor today where the Israeli army fired gunshots. Al Jazeera reported that the army had opened fire against crowds and aired footage showing displaced Palestinians ducking as they moved through the crowd, carrying personal belongings such as mattresses and blankets. There were no injuries reported. Hamas said in a statement today that Israel's denying the return of Palestinians to the north. They're warning that there will be consequences if that's not allowed to happen. And Islamic Jihad communicated today that Israel will allow displaced Palestinians to return to the north and across the Netzarim corridor after having received the confirmation that Arbel Yehud is alive. At least 3 Palestinians were injured in Gaza by Israeli bullets in Salah ad-Din Street in the central Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. And UNRWA has said that at least 7 children have died from cold in Gaza since the ceasefire took place last week. The death toll in Gaza is now at 47,283 people since October 7th. After the release of prisoners, Arab news sources reported that Israeli army members stormed homes of the released Palestinian prisoners, particularly Ashraf al-Zagir in an area just north of occupied East Jerusalem. Hours after his release from Ofer prison, the Israeli military forbade all celebrations, and they said a flag of Hamas was raised during a gathering for his return. Local sources told Palestinian news that the army opened fire during the raid and 2 people were wounded. The Israeli army also stormed the town of Karawat, Bani Zaid in northwest of Ramallah during a celebration for the return of another freed prisoner. The United States issued a statement from the White House saying the U.S. will continue to push for the release of all Israeli captives, that the world is celebrating, which we are celebrating the return of the hostages, but specifically the White House said that all credit should go to President Donald Trump, who secured the release of these hostages. The U.S. will continue to support its great partner Israel to press for the release of all the remaining hostages and the pursuit of peace in the region. That was a White House statement. An Israeli soldier was seriously wounded in an operation in the West Bank. The military reported 2 other soldiers sustained light injuries. You'll recall that there have been numerous deaths. Yesterday, there was a military aircraft that bombed a vehicle in Kabatia, south of Jenin, that killed 2 people. This is a part of Netanyahu's Operation Iron Wall. At least 10 people have been killed, including a child, since that operation began several days ago, I believe on Tuesday. The Hezbollah-Israel ceasefire is set to expire this weekend. The IDF is supposed to withdraw from South Lebanon, but Israel says it intends to delay the pullback. It says it's coordinating this with the U.S. There was a call with the French President Macron and the Lebanese President Aoun, where the French president was trying to talk the Lebanese into accepting an extension of the Israeli presence. And this past week, I just wanted to let you know and remind you, Churches for Middle East Peace completed the Week of Christian Unity. We were highlighting Andrew DeCourt's book on the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes of Jesus. Those videos are available, and I'd encourage you to take a look. They're less than 30 minutes long, and they've been really, really powerful this past week. CMEP yesterday also put out a statement calling for de-escalation, demilitarization, and a support of a permanent ceasefire towards lasting peace. And part of what we were highlighting was how Trump has identified himself as being a president of peace, and yet his first orders were to release heavy bombs, to overturn, the indictments against settlers. And so we were highlighting some of those specific things. Also, I wanted to let you know, one of the things I'm doing to help support Churches for Middle East Peace is I'm training for an Ironman. It'll be in September, and I'd love to invite you to consider making a donation to that. All the funds for that will go towards Churches for Middle East Peace. I have 9 months to train for 2.4 miles of swimming, 112 miles of biking, and then a marathon to run. And so I would love your prayers and support in that regard. And if you could help us raise funds for that, my goal is to raise $1,000 for every mile, so $140,000. And I'm just getting started. So may God continue to go before us and all, and in the critical days ahead. Amen.